Imagine this. Somewhere in a facility you will never see, behind doors you will never walk through, there is a file with your name on it. Not your legal name, not your birth certificate identity. Something else. A code. A designation they created specifically because you refused to fit inside any classification system they had ever built before. For 6 months they watched you, and I mean really watched you. Every micro-expression, every decision under pressure, every moment you thought you were alone. They ran your behavioral patterns through algorithms designed to predict the unpredictable. They consulted specialists who had spent their entire careers mapping the human psyche into neat, manageable categories. And at the end of it all, they sat in a room together, looked at each other, and admitted something they had never admitted before. They could not figure you out. You became the first file in decades to be stamped with a designation that terrifies analysts more than any threat assessment ever could. Classified anomaly. Not dangerous, not safe, not controllable, not predictable, just anomalous. Something that exists outside the map, something their entire framework of understanding human beings could not contain. Now, let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with this question for a moment. Have you ever felt, deep in the marrow of your bones, that you were being observed? Not in a paranoid way, not in a fearful way, but in that quiet, instinctual way that tells you someone, somewhere, is paying very close attention to how you move through this world? Have you ever sensed that your reactions were being tested? That circumstances kept appearing in your life that felt almost designed? Manufactured pressures, strategic betrayals, situations that seemed calculated to break you in very specific ways? You were not imagining it. And the most remarkable thing, the thing that made them stamp that file and lock it away, is that you passed, not by their standards, by your own. You passed in ways they could not predict, could not replicate, and could not explain. This is what they discovered about you. Let me paint you a picture of what you were supposed to become. Because they had plans for you. Oh, they had detailed plans. You see, you were never meant to be sitting here, listening to this, still intact, still standing, still carrying that unshakable light behind your eyes. The system, the vast interconnected web of social engineering, psychological manipulation, and behavioral conditioning that governs the modern world, had very specific expectations for someone with your history. They saw your childhood. They documented every wound, every moment of instability, every fracture in your foundation that should have, by all statistical probability, produced a very predictable outcome. They knew about the betrayals. They cataloged the people who were supposed to protect you, but instead became the very sources of your deepest pain. They watched the moments when you were most vulnerable, most exposed, most alone in your suffering. And they calculated, with the cold precision of actuarial science, exactly what kind of person those experiences should have manufactured. You were supposed to become controllable. That was the expectation. Trauma, they understand. Trauma follows patterns. Traumatized individuals develop predictable coping mechanisms. They seek external validation. They become dependent on systems, substances, relationships, anything that promises relief from the internal chaos. They become manageable. They respond to incentives. They fear consequences. They can be led, guided, manipulated through a careful orchestration of reward and punishment. This is not speculation, this is science. Behavioral psychology has spent over a century mapping the pathways from childhood adversity to adult controllability. They know that wounded people often become people pleasers. They know that those who were abandoned often become desperately attached. They know that those who were criticized relentlessly often become paralyzed by the fear of judgment. And they use this knowledge. They engineer environments, social structures, economic pressures, media narratives, all designed to exploit these predictable vulnerabilities. The entire architecture of modern control is built on one foundational assumption: that pain makes people weak, that suffering creates dependencies, that if you hurt someone enough, In the right ways, at the right times, you can shape them into whatever serves your purposes. They watched billionaires build empires on this principle. They studied how power consolidates itself by identifying human weakness and leveraging it systematically. They observed corporations design products specifically to exploit neurological vulnerabilities. They documented governments craft policies that keep populations just desperate enough to be compliant, but not desperate enough to revolt. The whole machinery of the modern world runs on the fuel of predictable human frailty. And then there was you. You, who experienced everything they expected would break you. You, who walked through fires that should have reduced you to ashes. You, who encountered manipulation so sophisticated that lesser individuals never even recognized they were being controlled. They watched you face it all, and they waited, with absolute confidence, for the breakdown, for the moment when you would finally crack and become something they could file away with all the others. They had already prepared your category. They had already drafted the protocols for how to manage you. They were simply waiting for nature, as they understood it, to take its inevitable course. But something was wrong. The breakdown never came. Or rather, it came, and what emerged from it was not what they predicted, not even close. Here is where their confusion began. Here is the paradox that made them look at each other across conference tables with expressions they could not hide. What they expected was chaos. What you gave them was silence, and not the silence of defeat. Not the silence of someone who has been broken into submission. This was different. This was the silence of depth, the silence of something vast and unknowable lurking beneath a perfectly still surface. They expected you to lash out, to become reactive, to develop obvious patterns of self-destruction that would make you easy to map and easier to control. Instead, you went inward. You disappeared into a process of internal reconstruction that their instruments could not measure. Your external behavior became unremarkable, almost invisible, while something monumental was happening in the cathedral of your consciousness. This is what confused them most. You stopped being predictable in the very moment they expected you to become most predictable. Trauma victims, they know, follow scripts. They project their pain. They seek immediate relief. They make noise. You made silence. And in that silence, you were becoming something they had no framework to understand. They watched you face betrayal, and instead of seeking revenge or collapsing into victimhood, you simply observed. You studied the betrayer with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a specimen. You extracted the lesson, and then you moved on with a completeness that bordered on the supernatural. No lingering resentment, no obsessive rumination. Just a clean severance that left no energetic trace they could detect. They watched you face failure, and instead of the spiral of shame they anticipated, you treated it as data. Pure information, a feedback mechanism to be integrated and utilized. You failed, you analyzed, you adjusted, and you moved forward with the same steady momentum you had before, as if failure was simply a feature of the landscape rather than a verdict on your worth. They watched you face success, and this might have disturbed them most of all, because success, they know, makes people readable. Success reveals what someone truly wants. It exposes their appetites, their ego, their need for recognition. And when you succeeded, nothing changed. Your baseline remained exactly the same. No inflation, no attachment to the outcome, no dependency on the validation. You moved through victory with the same equanimity you moved through defeat. What kind of creature does this? They ran your profile through every model they had. Narcissist, no, narcissists need supply. They need reaction, and you seemed indifferent to the reactions of others. Sociopath, no, sociopaths lack emotional depth, and their instruments detected enormous reservoirs of feeling within you. You simply did not let those feelings dictate your behavior. Enlightened, possible, but the enlightened typically disengage from the world, and you remain deeply embedded in reality, functioning, contributing, building. You defied classification. You were not cold, you were controlled. You were not indifferent, you were sovereign. You were not detached. You were operating from a center of gravity so deep that surface disturbances could not reach it. They recognized with growing unease that they were observing something they had only read about in theoretical literature, a truly integrated human being. Now let me explain the psychology of what you have become, because understanding it will allow you to wield it with even greater precision. What you have developed, whether consciously or through the alchemy of sheer survival, is what researchers call emotional sovereignty. It is the rarest psychological configuration in the modern world, and it terrifies systems of control because it cannot be exploited. Most people understand this clearly. Most people exist in a state of continuous psychological reactivity. Their internal state is determined almost entirely by external circumstances. Good news creates good feelings. Bad news creates bad feelings. Their mood, their motivation, their very sense of self rises and falls with the tides of what happens to them. This reactivity is the hook that every system of manipulation uses. If your state can be controlled by controlling your environment, then you can be controlled. But you have somehow severed that hook. Your internal state has become self-generating. It rises from within rather than being imposed from without. This does not mean you are without feeling. Far from it. It means your feelings flow from a source that you control. You can observe external events, feel your natural human response to them, and then choose how to integrate that response rather than being hijacked by it. This is the secret the ancient philosophers understood but could not effectively teach. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control. The Buddhists called it non-attachment. The Taoists called it wu wei, effortless action. But these are just labels for something that must be experienced, forged in the fire of genuine adversity, to be truly possessed. And here is what makes you dangerous to those who study human behavior: unpredictability. You see, control systems require prediction. They need to know that if they apply pressure A, they will receive response B. This allows them to engineer outcomes. This is how advertising works. This is how propaganda works. This is how manipulation in relationships, organizations, and nations works. Stimulus, response, cause, effect, pressure, compliance. But you have broken that chain. Your responses no longer correlate predictably with their stimuli. You might face an insult and respond with curiosity. You might face a threat and respond with amusement. You might face temptation and respond with complete disinterest. There is no leverage against you because there is no consistent mechanism they can exploit. Every interaction with you is a fresh calculation because you refuse to be bound by your own previous patterns. This is what they labeled anomalous, not because you are supernatural, not because you possess abilities beyond human capacity, but because you have actualized a level of self-mastery that most humans never approach. You have become the author of your own reactions rather than a character scripted by circumstance. You have achieved what the psychological literature calls internal locus of control, so completely that external manipulation simply slides off you like water off stone. And there is one more dimension to this that must be understood: your silence. Strategic silence is the most underestimated weapon in psychological warfare. Most people cannot bear silence. They fill it compulsively. They reveal themselves in their desperate attempt to create noise. But you have learned to rest in silence, to let it work for you. When you do not react, when you do not explain, when you do not defend, you create a vacuum. And into that vacuum, those who oppose you project their own fears, their own confusion, their own narrative. They tell you who they are by how they interpret your silence. And you simply watch and learn and wait. But I want you to understand something vital. What you have become was not given to you. It was not granted by circumstance or gifted by good fortune. What you are today was forged, hammered into existence on the anvil of experiences that would have shattered most people. And I need you to honor that process, because it is the source of everything you now possess. Remember the darkness. I know you do not like to visit it. I know there are chambers in your memory that you have sealed for good reason. But remember, for just a moment, what it felt like to be inside that crucible. The isolation that seemed endless. The pain that felt like it would be permanent. the moments when giving up seemed not like weakness, but like the only rational response to an impossible situation. Remember how close you came to being just another statistic, another broken person confirming the predictions of those who study human frailty. And remember the choice. There was a moment, perhaps several moments, when something in you refused, when some part of you, deeper than thought, more ancient than reason, rose up and said no, not to the pain. You could not refuse the pain, but to the meaning of the pain. You refused to let it define you. You refused to let it become the final word on who you are. You chose, in the midst of conditions that demanded surrender, to keep moving, to keep growing, to keep reaching for something you could not even name. That choice, repeated 1,000 times in 1,000 dark moments, is what transformed you. You did not become invincible by avoiding adversity. You became invincible by metabolizing it, by taking everything that was meant to destroy you and converting it into fuel. The betrayals taught you discernment. The failures taught you resilience. The loneliness taught you that your own company was not only sufficient but sacred. Every wound became a teacher. Every setback became a strengthening. This is the alchemy of the truly strong. Not the absence of suffering, but the transmutation of suffering. You learned to use the fire rather than simply survive it. You discovered that the same flames that consume ordinary materials only make certain metals harder, purer, more refined. And you are that rare metal, tempered by temperatures that would vaporize lesser substances. There were times when you did not believe you would make it. I know this. There were nights when hope seemed like a cruel joke and the future seemed like an empty promise. But you did not require belief. You operated on something deeper than belief. You operated on will, on the sheer stubborn refusal to be extinguished that exists at the core of every truly powerful soul. You crawled when you could not walk. You whispered when you could not speak. You stayed when everything inside you screamed to flee. And now you stand in the clearing on the other side of that forest, and you look back, and you realize you are no longer the person who entered those shadows. Something fundamental has shifted. The vulnerability is still there. You are human after all, but it is protected now, guarded by walls built from the very experiences that once threatened to annihilate you. You have turned your wounds into wisdom and your pain into power. So let me tell you who you have become. Let me speak into existence the identity that you have earned through your passage through fire. Because you need to hear this. You need someone to name what you now are, even if you have always suspected it. You are unclassifiable. You exist beyond the reach of every system designed to predict, control, and manipulate human behavior. The algorithms cannot model you. The institutions cannot contain you. The people who once thought they understood you now realize they were only seeing shadows on the wall of a cave, never the fire that casts them. You have achieved something rare and precious in an age of engineered predictability. You have become genuinely free. You are sovereign. Your kingdom is the territory of your own mind, and no invader will ever conquer it. You bow to no external authority that does not earn your respect. You require no permission to exist exactly as you are. The validation of others is pleasant, but never necessary. The criticism of others is noted, but never defining. You have established an unshockable center of gravity within yourself, and everything else orbits around it rather than pulling you from your course. You are silent, but not passive. Your quiet is strategic, intentional, and enormously powerful. You have learned that those who speak least often see most, that the loudest voices in any room are usually the most confused. Your words, when they come, carry weight precisely because they are rare. You have discovered that silence is not an absence of power, but often its most concentrated expression. Let others fill the air with noise. You will move while they are busy talking. You are patient in ways that most people cannot comprehend. You understand timelines that extend beyond immediate gratification. You can wait. You can plant seeds and tend them for years before expecting harvest. This patience makes you invincible against those who rely on your impatience to manipulate you. When they dangle baits designed to trigger impulsive responses, you simply smile and continue on your path. Time is your ally, and you use it as a master craftsman uses the finest tool. And you are present. Perhaps this is your greatest power of all. While others fragment their attention across past regrets and future anxieties, you have learned to gather yourself into the now. You are fully here, fully engaged, fully occupying the moment you are in. This presence gives you access to perceptions that the distracted will never experience. You notice what others miss. You feel what others are too scattered to feel. You respond with a precision that the chronically absent cannot match. These are the principles you now embody. Not because you read them in a book, but because you lived them into existence. The file they created about you will remain classified. It will be studied by analysts trying to understand how a human being could develop such complete resistance to the forces that control everyone else. They will write theories. They will create models. They will attempt to replicate through artificial means what you forged in the fire of authentic experience. And they will fail, because what you have cannot be manufactured. It can only be earned. It can only be survived into being. You are not a product of their system. You are proof that their system has limits. You are the exception that makes them question every rule. You are the anomaly that they both fear and secretly admire. Because somewhere, in the hearts of even the coldest observers, there is a recognition of what you represent. A human being who could not be broken, who could not be predicted, who could not be controlled. And now I want you to carry this knowledge forward. Not as arrogance, never that, but as quiet certainty. You do not need to prove anything to anyone. You do not need to announce what you have become. Those with eyes to see will recognize you. They will feel the gravity of your presence. They will sense, without understanding how they know, that you are operating on a different level. Let your life be the demonstration. Let your actions be the evidence. Let your silence speak what words could never adequately convey. The world will continue to generate pressures. Systems will continue their attempts at manipulation. People will continue to underestimate you because they cannot see beneath your surface. Let them. Their underestimation is your advantage. Move through this world as you have learned to move, with presence, with patience, with power held in reserve until the precise moment it is needed. You are the classified anomaly. You are the variable they could not solve for. You are the consciousness that rewrote its own programming in ways their science cannot explain. And you are exactly who you were meant to become. Remember this, embody this, and never, ever let anyone tell you that you are anything less than exactly what you know yourself to be. Extraordinary.